Eliza Hart stood in the middle of a town that had already decided she didn't belong. A widow, a stranger, a woman alone. That was crime enough. The mayor pointed toward the desert. The shopkeeper turned his back. Even the church locked its doors. No work, no room, no mercy. Just 72 hours before they drag her out in chains. She had blisters on her feet, 5 cents in her pocket, and a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Disappear into nothing, or walk straight into hell and dare it to break her. If you want to see how far one woman can go when the world says she's already finished, stay until the end. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The town didn't have a name worth remembering. Eliza stepped off the supply wagon just after noon, and the dust hadn't even settled before the stairs began. She stood there on the edge of the main road with her traveling bag at her feet and her late husband's coat folded over one arm, and she could feel the weight of every single pair of eyes. She'd expected curiosity, maybe suspicion. What she got was something colder. A woman in a faded blue dress whispered something to the man beside her, and they both turned away. 2 men leaning against the post office didn't bother whispering. They just looked her up and down like she was livestock and found her lacking. A boy no older than 10 threw a rock that skittered past her boots, and when she looked up, his mother pulled him inside without a word of apology. Eliza had been a stranger before, but she'd never been this kind of stranger. She picked up her bag and started walking. The general store was the first stop. It always was. If you could get credit, you could get a foothold. If you could get a foothold, you could get work. If you could get work, you could survive long enough to figure out what came next. The door stuck when she pushed it, swollen wood scraping against the frame, and the bell above her head let out a flat, joyless clang. Inside, the air smelled like lamp oil and old flour. Shelves lined the walls, half empty. A few crates sat stacked near the counter. Behind it stood a man with thinning hair and a mouth that looked like it hadn't smiled in years. He didn't look up when she walked in. "Excuse me," Eliza said. He kept his eyes on the ledger in front of him, one finger dragging down a column of numbers. "I'm looking for work," she continued. "Anything you might need. I can keep books, stock shelves, clean, not hiring." The words came out flat. Final. Eliza waited a beat, then tried again. "I don't need much, just enough to—" "Shh." I said no. This time he did look up, and his expression didn't change. "You're the widow, aren't you?" She hesitated. "I am. Heard about you. Came in on the supply run. No husband, no family, no business being here. I'm just looking for a chance to—" "Don't care what you're looking for. We got enough problems without taking on somebody else's." Eliza felt her jaw tighten. She'd practiced staying calm, practiced keeping her voice steady. But there was something about the way he said somebody else's that made her want to throw the ledger in his face. Instead, she nodded once. "Thank you for your time." She turned and walked out before he could say anything else. The mayor's office was next. It wasn't much of an office, just a cramped room above the land office with a desk, 2 chairs, and a window that overlooked the street. The man sitting behind the desk had a thick mustache and the kind of gut that came from too many years of sitting still. His nameplate said Mayor Samuel Drake, and he didn't stand when she knocked. "Come in." Eliza stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "Mayor Drake, my name is Eliza Hart. I arrived this afternoon, and I'm hoping you might be able to help me find— I know who you are." That stopped her cold. Drake leaned back in his chair, fingers laced over his stomach. Word travels fast in a town this size. "You're the widow who came in with nothing, no references, no connections, no plan." "I have a plan," Eliza said quietly. "I'm looking for work. Work." He said it like it was a foreign word. "Doing what exactly?" "Anything. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, tend to children. You have experience?" "I kept a household for 8 years. I managed a boarding house kitchen before that." "Where?" "St. Louis." Drake's eyebrows went up. "St. Louis? That's a long way from here." "Yes, sir." "So why aren't you still there?" Eliza hesitated. She had prepared for this question, but it didn't make it any easier to answer. "My husband passed. I couldn't afford to stay." "No family?" "No, sir." "Friends?" "No." Drake let out a long breath through his nose like he was already tired of the conversation. "Mrs. Hart, I'm going to be straight with you. This town doesn't have room for charity cases. We're barely scraping by as it is. Every family here is working twice as hard just to keep food on the table. Nobody's got the resources to take on a stranger who can't pull her weight. I can pull my weight, Eliza said, and she didn't try to keep the edge out of her voice this time. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for a chance to work. Drake didn't blink. And I'm telling you there isn't any. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Eliza's hands tightened around the strap of her bag. Then what am I supposed to do? That's not my problem. It's going to be your problem if I starve in the street. Drake's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. Let me make this real simple for you, Mrs. Hart. You've got 3 days. That's it. 3 days to find work, find a place, or find your way out of town. If you're still here after that, I'll have the deputy remove you. Eliza stared at him. Remove me. That's right. For what? I haven't done anything. Vagrancy. Loitering. Take your pick. He picked up a pen and went back to whatever he'd been writing before she walked in. 3 days, Mrs. Hart. I suggest you use them wisely. Shit. Eliza didn't remember leaving the office. One moment she was standing in front of Drake's desk, and the next she was outside on the street with the sun beating down on her shoulders and her chest so tight she could barely breathe. 3 days. She'd been in worse spots before. She'd been broke before. She'd been alone before. But she'd never been all three at once, and she'd never had a clock ticking down on top of it. The church was across the street. Eliza looked at it for a long moment, then started walking. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was cooler, and the light coming through the windows was soft and golden. Rows of empty pews stretched toward the altar, and the smell of old wood and candle wax hung in the air like a memory. A man in a black coat stood near the front, arranging hymnals. He looked up when she walked in, and for a second she thought she saw something like kindness in his face. Can I help you? Eliza stepped forward. I hope so. My name is Eliza Hart. I'm new in town, and I'm looking for work. I thought maybe we don't have any positions available. The kindness vanished so fast she wondered if it had ever been there at all. I wasn't asking for a position, Eliza said carefully. Just if you knew of anyone who might need help. A family, maybe. Or, I'm afraid I don't. Are you sure? Because I'm willing to do just about anything. I can, Mrs. Hart. His voice was firm now, the kind of firm that came with practice. I understand you're in a difficult situation, but this community is already stretched thin. We simply don't have the resources to take on someone without connections. Connections, Eliza repeated. Family, references, a history. I have a history. Not here. Eliza felt something crack inside her chest, small and sharp. So that's it then. I'm a stranger, so I don't matter. The man's expression didn't change. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She turned and walked out before he could say anything else. By the time the sun started to sink, Eliza had knocked on 14 doors. 14. Some people were polite. Some weren't. A few didn't even open the door all the way, just cracked it enough to see her face and then shut it again without a word. One woman told her to try the saloon. Another told her to try the next town over. A man with a face like old leather told her she should have thought about that before she came out here alone. By the time she reached the edge of town, her feet were screaming and her throat was dry as sand. She sat down on a bench outside the livery stable and let her bag drop to the ground beside her. 3 days. She pulled out the small pouch she kept in her coat pocket and counted the coins inside. 5 cents. That was it. Not enough for a room, not enough for a meal, barely enough for a cup of coffee. She closed her eyes and leaned back against the wall. For the first time since she'd stepped off that wagon, she let herself think about what happened if she failed. If she couldn't find work. If she couldn't find shelter. If she was still here in 3 days and the deputy came to drag her out. Where would they take her? A jail cell? The edge of town? Or would they just leave her out in the desert and let the heat do the rest? A door slammed somewhere behind her and she opened her eyes. A man was walking toward her. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a hat pulled low over his face. He stopped a few feet away and looked down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You the widow? Eliza straightened. I am. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. Heard you were looking for work. I am. What kind? Any kind. He studied her for a long moment, and Eliza forced herself to hold his gaze. She didn't know who he was, but she knew desperation when she smelled it, and right now she smelled it on herself. "You any good at cooking?" he asked. "Yes." "Cleaning?" "Yes." "Mending?" "Yes." "Ranch work?" She hesitated. "I'm willing to learn." The man let out a breath that might have been a laugh. Might have been something else. "You got a name?" "Eliza Hart." "Cole Turner." He tipped his hat. "I got a ranch about an hour north of here. It's not much. Place is falling apart, and I got 2 boys who don't know how to cook anything that doesn't come out of a can. I need help. You need work. Seems like we might be able to figure something out." Eliza felt her heart kick against her ribs. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a week. You work hard, you can stay. You don't, you leave. Fair." It wasn't fair, it wasn't even close to fair, but it was more than anyone else had offered. "Fair," Eliza said. Cole nodded. "Good. I'll be back here at dawn tomorrow. You be ready." He turned and started walking away, and Eliza watched him go until he disappeared around the corner. Then she sat back down on the bench and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. 3 days. She had 3 days to prove she was worth keeping, and she wasn't going to waste a single one. That night, Eliza slept in the livery stable. She didn't ask permission. She just waited until the sun went down and the stable hand left, and then she slipped inside and found a corner in the back where the hay was piled high. It smelled like horses and dust, and the ground was hard beneath her, but it was shelter. And shelter was more than she'd had an hour ago. She pulled her coat tight around her shoulders and closed her eyes. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. A door slammed. Voices drifted past, low and indistinct. Eliza lay there and listened to the town settle into sleep, and she thought about the man who'd offered her a week. Cole Turner. She didn't know anything about him, didn't know if he was kind or cruel, fair or ruthless, didn't know if he'd work her until she dropped, or give her a real chance. But she knew one thing. He'd said yes when everyone else had said no, and that was enough. Dawn came cold and sharp. Eliza woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of wood smoke drifting through the cracks in the stable walls. She sat up, brushed the hay out of her hair, and pulled her coat back on. Her body ached in a dozen places, and her feet were still sore from yesterday's walking, but she ignored it. She had work to do. By the time she stepped outside, the sky was just starting to lighten. The street was empty, except for a single figure standing near the edge of town, a horse beside him. Cole Turner. Eliza picked up her bag and walked toward him. He looked up when she got close, and if he was surprised to see her, he didn't show it. "You ready?" "I am." "Good." He swung up into the saddle and held out a hand. "Climb on." Eliza hesitated. She'd ridden before, but not like this. Not behind a stranger. Not with everything she owned in a bag slung over her shoulder. But she didn't have a choice. She took his hand and let him pull her up. The horse shifted beneath them, and Cole turned it toward the road. "Hold on." Eliza wrapped her arms around his waist, and the horse started moving. They rode in silence. The town fell away behind them, and the land opened up into something wide and empty. Hills rolled away toward the horizon, brown and gold under the early morning light. The air smelled like sage and dust, and the only sound was the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves against the ground. Eliza kept her eyes forward and tried not to think about what she was riding toward. A ranch, 2 boys, a week to prove herself. It didn't sound like much, but it was all she had. The ranch appeared just as the sun cleared the horizon. It wasn't what Eliza had expected. The house was small and weathered, with paint peeling off the shutters and a porch that sagged on one side. The barn looked like it had seen better days, and the fence around the corral was missing more posts than it had. A few chickens scratched in the dirt near the front steps, and a dog lay sleeping in the shade of a broken wagon wheel. Cole brought the horse to a stop and swung down. "Welcome to the Turner Ranch." Eliza climbed down after him, her legs stiff from the ride. She looked around, taking it all in. The place wasn't just run down, it was exhausted. "It's not much," Cole said, and there was something almost apologetic in his voice. "But it's mine." "It's fine," Eliza said. Cole gave her a look like he didn't quite believe her, but he didn't argue. Come on, I'll show you around. He led her toward the house, and the dog lifted its head as they approached. It was an old dog, gray around the muzzle, and it watched them with tired eyes. That's Rufus, Cole said. Don't worry, he doesn't bite. Doesn't do much of anything, really. Eliza reached down and let the dog sniff her hand. Rufus gave her fingers a half-hearted lick and then went back to sleep. Inside, the house was dim and cramped. The main room had a stone fireplace, a table with 4 mismatched chairs, and a shelf lined with dusty jars and tin cans. A pot sat on the stove, crusted with something that might have been stew a week ago. Dishes were piled in a wooden tub near the window, and the floor looked like it hadn't been swept in months. Boys are still asleep, Cole said quietly. They'll be up soon. Eliza set her bag down by the door and looked around. The place wasn't dirty, exactly. It was just neglected, like nobody had the time or the energy to care about it anymore. What do you need me to do? She asked. Cole rubbed the back of his neck. Honestly, everything. Cooking, cleaning, keeping the boys in line. I'm out working the land most days, and I can't be in 2 places at once. If you can keep this place from falling apart, that'd be a good start. Eliza nodded. I can do that. Good. He glanced toward the hallway. I'll wake the boys. You can get started on breakfast. He disappeared into the back of the house, and Eliza turned toward the stove. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The boys came out 20 minutes later. They were identical. Same dark hair, same brown eyes, same wary expressions. One of them was wearing a shirt with a hole in the elbow, and the other had dirt smudged across his cheek. They stopped in the doorway and stared at her. Morning, Eliza said. Neither of them said anything. Cole appeared behind them, his hand on their shoulders. This is Mrs. Hart. She's going to be helping out around here for a while. Noah, Luke, say hello. The boy on the left, Noah, maybe, mumbled something that might have been a greeting. The other one just kept staring. Sit down, Cole said, and they shuffled over to the table without a word. Eliza set plates in front of them, eggs fried in butter, biscuits still warm from the oven, a little bit of jam she'd found in the back of the cupboard. The boys looked down at their plates like they weren't sure what to do with them. Go on, Cole said. Eat. Noah picked up his fork and took a bite, then another. Then he looked up at Eliza with something like surprise. It's good, he said quietly. Luke nodded, his mouth already full. Eliza felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you. Cole sat down at the head of the table and started eating without a word. The boys followed his lead, and for a few minutes, the only sound was the scrape of forks against tin. Then Noah looked up again. Where'd you come from? Noah, Cole said sharply. It's all right, Eliza said. She looked at the boy and gave him a small smile. I came from town. Why? Because I needed work. Why? Noah, Cole said again, but Eliza shook her head. Because I didn't have anywhere else to go. Noah frowned, like he was trying to figure out if that made sense. Do you got a husband? I did. He passed away. Oh. Noah looked down at his plate. Our ma passed away too. The room went very quiet. Cole's jaw tightened and Luke stopped chewing. Eliza didn't say anything. She didn't know what to say. After a long moment, Cole stood up. Finish eating, then get your chores done. He walked out without another word, and the boys watched him go. Eliza sat down across from them and picked up her own fork. What kind of chores do you have? Noah shrugged. Feeding the chickens, hauling water, stuff like that. Sounds like hard work. It's not that hard. Still, I'm impressed. Noah looked at her like he wasn't sure if she was making fun of him or not. Then he went back to eating. Eliza watched them both, and she thought about what Noah had said. Our ma passed away too. She didn't ask how long ago, didn't ask what happened. She could see the answer in the way Cole's shoulders had tensed, and the way Luke hadn't said a word since she'd arrived. This family was broken, and she was walking into the middle of it. The first day was the hardest. Eliza scrubbed dishes until her hands were raw, swept floors until her back ached, hauled water from the well until her arms felt like they were going to fall off. The boys watched her from a distance, curious but cautious, and Cole stayed outside until the sun went down. By the time night fell, Eliza was so tired she could barely stand. But the house was clean, the dishes were done, supper was on the table. Cole came in just as she was setting out the last plate. He stopped in the doorway and looked around, and for a second she thought she saw something shift in his expression. "Smells good," he said quietly. "Thank you." He sat down and the boys followed. They ate in silence again, but this time it felt different, less tense, less hollow. After supper, Eliza cleared the table and washed the dishes while Cole put the boys to bed. She could hear him talking to them in the other room, his voice low and steady, and she found herself listening without meaning to. When he came back out, she was drying the last plate. "You did good today," he said. Eliza looked up. "Thank you. I mean it. This place hasn't looked like this in a long time." She set the plate down. "How long?" Cole didn't answer right away. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed, and stared at the floor like he was trying to decide how much to say. 2 years, he said finally. "My wife died 2 years ago. Fever took her in 3 days. Didn't even have time to say goodbye." Eliza's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "Yeah, me too." He looked up and his eyes were hard. "I'm telling you this so you understand. Those boys, they've been through hell. They don't need someone who's going to leave. So if you're planning on running, do it now. Don't wait until they get attached." Eliza met his gaze and didn't look away. "I'm not planning on running." "Good." He pushed off the doorframe and started toward the hallway. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be just as long." He disappeared into the back of the house, and Eliza stood there alone in the dim light of the kitchen. She thought about what he'd said. They don't need someone who's going to leave. Neither did she. The second day was easier. Eliza woke before the sun and started breakfast. The boys came out without being asked, and they ate without staring at her this time. Cole said a quiet thank you before heading out to work the land, and Eliza spent the day mending clothes and cleaning windows and doing all the small things that nobody had had time to do. By the third day, the boys were talking to her. Not much. Just little things. Noah asked if she could fix the tear in his favorite shirt. Luke asked if she knew any songs. She said yes to both, and they seemed satisfied with that. On the fourth day, Noah brought her a drawing he'd made. It was a picture of the ranch, done in charcoal on the back of an old feed sack. The lines were crooked and the proportions were off, but it was clear he'd put effort into it. "This is really good," Eliza said. Noah's face turned red. "It's not that good." "It is. You've got talent." He looked down at his boots, but she could see the smile trying to break through. That night, Luke fell asleep at the table. Eliza carried him to bed, and when she came back out, Cole was standing in the kitchen. "They like you," he said. "I like them." "That's dangerous." Eliza frowned. "Why?" "Because you've only got 3 more days. After that, I have to decide if you stay or go." She felt her stomach drop. She'd been so focused on the work that she'd almost forgotten about the deadline. "And?" she asked quietly. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "I don't know yet." Asab. The 5th day started like the others, but it ended differently. Eliza was in the garden, pulling weeds, when she heard the sound of hooves. She looked up and saw 3 men riding toward the house. They were dressed in town clothes, and they didn't look friendly. Cole came out of the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. "Can I help you?" The man in front, a thick-necked man with a badge pinned to his chest, swung down from his horse. "Cole Turner?" "That's me. I'm Deputy Carson. Got a complaint about you harboring a vagrant." Eliza's blood went cold. Cole's expression didn't change. "Vagrant?" "The widow, Eliza Hart. Mayor Drake says she was supposed to be gone by now." "She's not a vagrant. She works for me." Carson's eyes flicked toward Eliza and she saw the disdain in them. "That's so." "It is." "You paying her?" "That's between me and her." Carson's jaw tightened. "Mayor wants her gone, Turner. You're just making this harder on yourself. Mayor doesn't get to tell me who I hire. He does if she's breaking the law." "She's not breaking the law. She's working." "Last I checked, that wasn't a crime." Carson took a step closer, and Eliza saw his hand move toward his belt. "You want to make this difficult? We can make it difficult." Cole didn't move. "Get off my property." The air went still. Carson stared at him. Cole stared back. Finally, Carson spat into the dirt and turned back to his horse. This isn't over. He swung up into the saddle, and the three men rode off without another word. Eliza stood there, her heart pounding, and watched them go. When they were out of sight, Cole turned to her. You all right? I think so. He nodded. Good. Get back to work. He walked back into the barn, and Eliza knelt down in the dirt and tried to steady her hands. This wasn't over. She knew that. But she wasn't gone yet. And that had to count for something. The deputy's visit changed things. Not all at once. Not in any way Eliza could point to and say, there, that's different. But she felt it in the air, in the way Cole's shoulders stayed tight even after the men rode off, in the way the boys got quieter at supper that night. She didn't ask about it. She just kept working. On the sixth day, she woke before dawn and found Cole already up, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him. He didn't look like he'd slept. Morning, Eliza said quietly. He glanced up, then back down at his cup. Morning. She moved to the stove and started breakfast. The silence stretched between them, heavy and unbroken, until finally Cole spoke. They're going to come back. Eliza cracked an egg into the pan. I know. Drake doesn't like being told no. And Carson's the kind of man who takes that personally. So what do we do? Cole let out a breath. I don't know yet. Eliza flipped the egg and reached for the salt. You could send me away. I could. Is that what you want? He was quiet for a long time. Then he stood up and carried his cup to the window, staring out at the land beyond. What I want doesn't matter much these days. It matters to me. He turned and looked at her, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite name. Not anger, not kindness, something in between. You've got one more day, he said. After that, I'll decide. Then he grabbed his hat and walked out. Eliza stood there with the spatula in her hand and watched him go. One more day. 24 hours to prove she was worth the trouble she was already causing. She turned back to the stove and kept cooking. The boys came out a few minutes later, rubbing sleep from their eyes. They sat down without a word, and Eliza set plates in front of them. Eggs, biscuits, a little bit of honey she'd found in the back of the cupboard. Noah poked at his food with his fork. Is Pa mad? No, Eliza said. Just thinking. About what? Grown-up things. Luke looked up. Are you leaving? The question hit her harder than she expected. She sat down across from them and tried to keep her voice steady. I don't know yet. I don't want you to leave, Luke said quietly. Noah kicked him under the table. Shut up. I don't. You barely even know her. So, she's nice. Eliza felt something twist in her chest. Thank you, Luke. That means a lot. Noah pushed his plate away. It doesn't matter if she's nice. Pa's the one who decides. I know that. So why are you making it harder? Luke's face crumpled, and Eliza reached across the table and put her hand over his. It's all right. Your brother's just worried. I'm not worried, Noah said, but his voice cracked on the last word. Eliza looked at him, and she saw it then. The fear under the defiance. The same fear she'd seen in the mirror every morning since her husband died. Listen to me, she said. Both of you. I don't know what's going to happen, but I promise you this. Whatever your father decides, I'm not going to just disappear without saying goodbye, all right? Noah stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and went back to eating. Luke squeezed her hand and let go. They finished breakfast in silence, and when they were done, the boys went outside to do their chores. Eliza cleared the table and started washing dishes, and she tried not to think about what would happen if Cole told her to leave. She'd survived worse. She could survive this. But it didn't make the thought any easier to swallow. By mid-morning, the heat was brutal. Eliza wiped sweat from her forehead and kept scrubbing the porch boards, working her way across the weathered wood on her hands and knees. The sun hammered down without mercy, and her back screamed in protest, but she didn't stop. She heard the wagon before she saw it. When she looked up, a woman was climbing down from the driver's seat, her dress crisp despite the dust, her hair pinned back in a way that probably took an hour to perfect. Behind her, two more women stepped down, both dressed just as carefully. Eliza got to her feet, wiping her hands on her apron. The first woman looked her up and down like she was inspecting livestock. You must be Mrs. Hart. I am. I'm Mrs. Brennan. This is Mrs. Colby and Mrs. Finch. We're from the town council. She said it like it was supposed to mean something. Eliza nodded. What can I do for you? Mrs. Brennan's smile didn't reach her eyes. We heard you were working for Mr. Turner. We thought we'd come by and see how you were settling in. That's kind of you. Is it? Mrs. Colby stepped forward, her gaze sharp. Because from what we've heard, you didn't exactly ask permission before inserting yourself into this family. Eliza felt her jaw tighten. Mr. Turner offered me work. I accepted. I didn't realize I needed permission from the town council. You don't? Mrs. Brennan said smoothly. But you do need to understand how things work around here. This is a small community. We look out for each other. And when a stranger shows up with no history, no references, and no explanation, people get concerned. Concerned about what? About whether you're trustworthy. I've been working here for almost a week. If Mr. Turner had concerns, I'm sure he'd have said something. Mrs. Finch laughed, a thin, brittle sound. Mr. Turner is a widower with 2 young boys. He's not exactly in a position to make sound decisions about who he lets into his home. Eliza's hands curled into fists. With all due respect, ma'am, that's not your decision to make. No, Mrs. Brennan said, but it is our responsibility to protect the people in this town, especially the vulnerable ones. The boys aren't vulnerable, they're taken care of. Are they? Mrs. Colby's voice turned sharp. Because from what I've seen, this place is falling apart. The house is a mess. The boys are running wild. And now there's a strange woman living here with no supervision whatsoever. I'm not living here. I'm working here. For how long? Eliza hesitated. That's between me and Mr. Turner. Mrs. Brennan's smile turned cold. I see. Well, Mrs. Hart, let me be very clear. If we hear even a whisper of impropriety, anything that suggests you're taking advantage of Mr. Turner or those boys, we will not hesitate to intervene. Intervene how? However we see fit. The words hung in the air like a threat. Eliza forced herself to stay calm. Is there anything else? Mrs. Brennan looked her up and down one more time, then turned back to the wagon. No, I think we've said what we came to say. The 3 women climbed back up, and the wagon rolled away without another word. Eliza stood there and watched them go, her heart pounding in her chest. She'd dealt with judgment before. She'd dealt with cruelty. But this was different. This wasn't just gossip or suspicion. This was a warning, and she had no idea what to do about it. When Cole came back that evening, she told him what happened. He listened without interrupting, his face unreadable, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long time. I'm sorry, Eliza said. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't cause it. They did. He set his hat on the table and rubbed his eyes. This is what I was afraid of. They're not going to let this go. So what do? I don't know. Cole? I said I don't know. His voice came out sharper than he probably meant it to, and he winced. Sorry. I need to think. Eliza nodded and turned back to the stove. She didn't push. She just kept cooking. That night, after the boys were in bed, Cole came out and sat at the table again. Eliza was mending one of Noah's shirts, and she didn't look up when he walked in. You're good with them, he said quietly. Eliza glanced up. The boys? Yeah, they listen to you, trust you. That's not easy. They're good kids. They are. But they've been through a lot, and they don't let people in easy. He paused. Neither do I. Eliza set the shirt down. What are you saying? Cole looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something other than walls in his eyes. I'm saying you've earned your keep. If you want to stay, you can stay. Not just for a week, for as long as it works. Eliza's breath caught. You mean that? I don't say things I don't mean. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, and she blinked them back. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This town's going to make it hell for both of us. I can handle it. Can you? Eliza met his gaze and didn't look away. I've handled worse. Cole nodded slowly. All right then. He stood up and started toward the hallway, then stopped. Eliza? Yes? You're not just good with the boys, you're good for them. Don't forget that. He disappeared into the back of the house before she could respond. Eliza sat there alone in the dim light, her hands shaking, and let the tears come. The next morning, she woke to the sound of breaking glass. She bolted upright and ran to the window. Outside, in the pale light of dawn, 3 men on horseback were circling the house. One of them hurled a bottle, and it shattered against the side of the barn. Cole was already outside, rifle in hand. "Get off my land!" The men laughed. One of them, a tall man with a scarred face, leaned forward in his saddle. "This is a warning, Turner. Get rid of the whore, or we'll do it for you." Eliza's blood turned to ice. Cole raised the rifle. "I'm not going to tell you again." "You going to shoot us, old man?" "If I have to." The scarred man spat into the dirt. "You're making a mistake." "So are you." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the scarred man pulled his horse around and rode off, the others following. Their laughter echoed across the empty land, and then they were gone. Cole lowered the rifle and turned back toward the house. His face was pale, his hands tight on the stock of the gun. Eliza met him at the door. "Are you all right?" "Fine." "Cole, I said I'm fine." He pushed past her and set the rifle down, then leaned against the table. His shoulders were shaking. Eliza stepped closer. "Who were they?" "Nobody." "Cole." He let out a breath. "Drifters. Troublemakers. The kind of men who show up when they smell weakness. They called me. I know what they called you." His voice was hard. "And they're wrong." Eliza swallowed. "Maybe I should go." "No. They're going to keep coming. You know that." "I don't care." "You should care. You have 2 boys to think about." Cole turned and looked at her, and his eyes were blazing. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't wake up every morning wondering if I'm doing the right thing? But I'll be damned if I let a bunch of cowards run me off my own land. This isn't about the land. It's about me. It's about both." He stepped closer. "You want to leave, Eliza? Fine. Walk out that door. But don't do it because you think you're protecting us. Do it because you want to go." Eliza stared at him. "I don't want to go." "Then don't." The silence between them was heavy and charged, and Eliza realized she was holding her breath. Finally, Cole stepped back. "Get the boys up. I need to ride into town." "What for?" "To make sure this doesn't happen again." He grabbed his coat and walked out before she could argue. Eliza stood there alone, her heart pounding, and tried to steady herself. This was getting worse, and she had no idea how to stop it. By the time Cole got back that afternoon, the boys were in the yard playing with a stick and a hoop. Eliza was hanging laundry, and she looked up when she heard the horse. Cole swung down and walked toward her, his face grim. "What happened?" Eliza asked. "I talked to the sheriff." "And?" "He said he'd look into it, but I could tell he didn't believe me." "Why not?" Cole's jaw tightened. "Because half the town thinks you're the problem. They think I'm being reckless, putting my boys at risk. Do you think that?" "No, but it doesn't matter what I think, not if they decide to make this official." Eliza felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean, official?" "I mean, if they get enough people together, they can petition the mayor, force me to let you go." "Can they do that?" "In a town this size, they can do whatever they want." Eliza looked down at the wet shirt in her hands. "Then what do we do?" "We keep going. We don't give them a reason to push harder." "And if they push anyway?" Cole didn't answer. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay on the thin bedroll Cole had set up for her in the corner of the main room, staring at the ceiling, and listened to the house settle around her. The boys were quiet in the next room. Cole was somewhere in the back. She thought about the men on horseback, the women from the town council, the deputy with his cold eyes and colder words. She thought about running. It would be easy. Wait until everyone was asleep, slip out the door, and disappear into the night. No goodbyes. No explanations. Just gone. But then she thought about Luke's question, "Are you leaving?" And she thought about Noah's defiance. It doesn't matter if she's nice. And she thought about Cole standing in front of those men with a rifle in his hands, refusing to back down. She couldn't leave. Not yet. Not like this. The next morning, she was up before the sun again. She made breakfast, woke the boys, and sent them outside to do their chores. Cole came out just as she was pouring coffee, and he sat down without a word. "I've been thinking," Eliza said. "About what?" About what happens next. Cole looked up. And? I think we need to go into town. He frowned. Why? Because hiding out here isn't going to change anything. If they think I'm some kind of threat, we need to show them I'm not. You want to walk into the lion's den. I want to stop being invisible. Cole studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, we'll go Sunday, after service. Eliza felt her pulse quicken. You sure? No, but you're right. We can't keep hiding. Sunday came too fast. Eliza spent the morning scrubbing herself clean and fixing her hair as best she could. She put on the one good dress she had left, the black one she'd worn to her husband's funeral, and she tried not to think about how much she looked like a widow. The boys wore their cleanest shirts, and Cole put on a jacket that looked like it hadn't seen daylight in years. They climbed into the wagon just after dawn, and the ride into town was silent. When they arrived, people were already gathering outside the building where services were held. Eliza saw the stares the moment she stepped down from the wagon, saw the whispers, saw the way people turned away. Cole put his hand on her elbow. Stay close. They walked toward the entrance, the boys trailing behind, and Eliza kept her chin up even though her legs felt like water. Mrs. Brennan was standing near the door, talking to a group of women. When she saw Eliza, her expression hardened. Mr. Turner, she said coolly. How unexpected. Mrs. Brennan, Cole tipped his hat. We thought we'd join you this morning. Did you? We did. Mrs. Brennan's gaze flicked to Eliza, then back to Cole. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Why not? Because people are uncomfortable. People or you? Mrs. Brennan's smile turned sharp. Does it matter? Cole's hand tightened on Eliza's elbow. Yes, it does. The two of them stared at each other, and Eliza could feel the weight of every single person watching. Then a voice cut through the tension. Let them in. Everyone turned. An older woman was standing near the entrance, her hair white as snow, her back bent with age. Eliza didn't recognize her, but everyone else seemed to. Mrs. Brennan's expression faltered. Mrs. Calloway, I didn't ask what you think, Helen. The old woman's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I said let them in. Mrs. Brennan's mouth opened, then closed. She stepped aside without another word. Cole nodded to the old woman. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet, boy. Just get inside before these vultures change their minds. They walked past her, and Eliza felt the old woman's eyes on her as they passed. Not judging, just watching. Inside, the room was packed. Every seat was full, and people stood along the walls. Cole led Eliza to an empty spot in the back, and the boys squeezed in beside them. The service started, and Eliza tried to focus on the words being spoken, but all she could feel was the weight of the room pressing down on her. When it ended, people filed out quickly, avoiding eye contact. Cole didn't move. He just sat there, his jaw tight, until the room was almost empty. Then Mrs. Calloway appeared in front of them. Walk with me, she said. It wasn't a request. Cole glanced at Eliza, and she nodded. They followed the old woman outside, the boys trailing behind, and she led them around to the side of the building where the crowd had thinned. You've got guts, girl, Mrs. Calloway said, looking at Eliza. I'll give you that. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me. I didn't say it was smart. She turned to Cole. You know what you're doing, bringing her here? I do. You sure about that? Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Calloway let out a breath. Well, you're a damn fool, but you're an honest one. That counts for something. She looked back at Eliza. What's your name, girl? Eliza Hart, ma'am. You got family? No, ma'am. Friends? Not here. So you're alone? I am. Mrs. Calloway nodded slowly. Then you'd better get used to it, because this town doesn't forgive easy, and it doesn't forget at all. Eliza swallowed. I understand. Do you? The old woman stepped closer. Because I've seen women like you before. Desperate, running, trying to find a place to land. Most of them don't make it. I'm not most women. Mrs. Calloway's eyes narrowed. Then she smiled, just a little. No, I don't think you are. She turned and walked away, and Eliza stood there watching her go. Cole touched her arm. Come on, let's get out of here. They climbed back into the wagon and rode home in silence. When they got back, The boys ran off to play, and Cole unhitched the horse without a word. Eliza went inside and started preparing supper, her hands moving on autopilot. She heard the door open behind her, and Cole stepped inside. "That was a mistake," he said quietly. Eliza turned. "What was?" "Going into town. I shouldn't have let you talk me into it." "Why not?" "Because now they know you're not going anywhere, and that's going to make things worse." Eliza set down the knife she'd been holding. "So what was I supposed to do? Hide forever?" "If it keeps you safe, yeah." "I don't want to be safe. I want to live." Cole stared at her, and something shifted in his expression. "You're not afraid of them, are you?" "I'm terrified of them, but I'm more afraid of disappearing." He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he nodded. "All right." "All right, what?" "All right, we'll do this your way. But if it goes bad, it won't. If it does," Cole continued, "you get out. You hear me? You don't wait. You don't argue. You just run." Eliza looked at him, and she saw the fear behind the command. Not fear for himself, fear for her. "I hear you," she said quietly. Cole held her gaze for another moment, then turned and walked back outside. Eliza stood there alone, her heart pounding, and wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. The quiet lasted 3 days. 3 days of normal work, normal meals, normal evenings, with the boys arguing over whose turn it was to feed the chickens. 3 days of Cole coming in at sunset, smelling like dirt and sweat, washing up at the basin while Eliza set supper on the table. 3 days of almost believing things might actually be all right. Then the letter came. Cole found it nailed to the barn door when he went out to feed the horses. He pulled it down and stood there reading it in the early morning light, and Eliza watched from the porch as his face went hard. He walked over and handed it to her without a word. The paper was cheap, the handwriting rough, but the message was clear enough. Town meeting, Saturday evening. Attendance mandatory. Subject: the Turner situation. Eliza read it twice, then looked up. "What does this mean?" "It means they're forcing the issue." Cole took the letter back and crumpled it in his fist. "Drake wants a public vote, whether I can keep you on or not." "Can they do that? In this town? They can do whatever the hell they want." He threw the paper into the dirt. "And if they vote against you, I'll have to let you go or face consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Cole didn't answer. He just stared out at the horizon, his jaw working. Eliza felt something cold settle in her stomach. "They're going to make an example of us." "Yeah, they are." "So what do we do?" Cole turned and looked at her, and there was something almost desperate in his eyes. "We show up, we make our case, and we hope to hell that enough people have a shred of decency left. And if they don't?" He didn't answer that either. The days leading up to Saturday crawled by like wounded animals. Eliza threw herself into the work, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, mending clothes that didn't need mending, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. The boys sensed something was wrong, but they didn't ask. They just stayed closer than usual, like they were afraid she might disappear if they looked away too long. On Friday night, Noah came into the kitchen while Eliza was cleaning up after supper. Cole had already gone to bed, and Luke was asleep in the other room. "Can I ask you something?" Noah said quietly. Eliza dried her hands on her apron. "Of course." He shifted his weight from foot to foot, not quite meeting her eyes. "Are they going to make you leave?" "I don't know. But they might." "Yes, they might." Noah was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up, and his eyes were bright with something that looked like anger. "It's not fair." "No, it's not. You didn't do anything wrong. I know. So why do they hate you?" Eliza pulled out a chair and sat down. "They don't hate me, Noah. They're just scared." "Of what? You're not scary." "No, but I'm different, and people don't like different. It makes them nervous." Noah crossed his arms. "That's stupid." "Maybe, but it's how people are." He kicked at the floor with his boot. "If they make you leave, I'm going to tell them they're all stupid." Eliza felt her throat tighten. "You don't have to do that." "Yeah, I do." He looked at her, and his voice cracked. "You're the first person who's been nice to us since Ma died. You're not allowed to leave." Eliza reached out and pulled him into a hug. He stiffened for a second, then collapsed against her. his small body shaking. She held him and didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't be a lie. When he finally pulled away, his face was red and his eyes were wet. He wiped them with the back of his hand and mumbled something that might have been "good night," then disappeared into the back room. Eliza sat there alone in the kitchen, staring at the cold stove, and let herself cry for the first time since she'd arrived. Saturday came too fast and not fast enough. Eliza put on her black dress again and tied her hair back. Cole wore his good shirt, the one with only a few patches, and the boys wore clean clothes without being told. They climbed into the wagon just after sunset, and the ride into town was silent except for the creak of the wheels and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. When they arrived, the building where the meeting was being held was already packed. People stood outside in clusters, talking in low voices, and they all turned to watch as Cole helped Eliza down from the wagon. "Stay together," Cole said quietly. "Don't let them separate us." Eliza nodded, and they walked toward the entrance with the boys between them. Inside, the room was stifling. Every seat was taken, and people lined the walls 3 deep. At the front, Mayor Drake sat behind a table with Deputy Carson on one side and Mrs. Brennan on the other. The air smelled like sweat and lamp oil, and something else Eliza couldn't quite name. Something sour. Cole led them to a spot near the back, and people moved aside just enough to let them through. Nobody spoke to them. Nobody looked at them directly. They just watched. Drake banged a gavel on the table, and the room went quiet. "All right, folks, let's get started." He looked around the room, his eyes landing on Cole. "I think we all know why we're here. Mr. Turner has taken it upon himself to employ a woman of unknown character and questionable morals. Some of you have expressed concerns. Tonight, we're going to address those concerns." Eliza felt her face burn, but she kept her expression neutral. "Now," Drake continued, "this isn't a trial. This is a community discussion. We're going to hear from anyone who has something to say, and then we're going to vote on whether Mr. Turner should be allowed to continue this arrangement." "This is ridiculous," Cole said, his voice carrying across the room. "You don't have the authority to tell me who I can hire." "Actually, we do," Drake said calmly. "Town charter gives us the right to intervene in matters of public concern. And this, Mr. Turner, is a matter of public concern." "Based on what? Gossip?" "Based on the fact that you've got a strange woman living under your roof with 2 young boys and no proper supervision." "She's not living under my roof. She's working for me." "There's a difference." "Is there?" Mrs. Brennan leaned forward. "Because from what I've heard, she sleeps in your house, eats at your table, spends every waking hour with your children. If that's not living there, I don't know what is." "She's an employee." "An employee you can't afford to pay." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Cole's jaw tightened. "That's none of your business." "It is when it affects the whole community. You're setting a dangerous precedent, Mr. Turner. What's to stop every drifter and vagrant from showing up expecting charity?" "She's not a drifter. She's a widow trying to survive." "So she says." Eliza felt something snap inside her. "I'm standing right here. If you have questions, ask me." The room went silent. Drake looked at her, his expression unreadable. "All right, Mrs. Hart. Let's hear it. Where did you come from?" "St. Louis." "Why did you leave?" "My husband died. I couldn't afford to stay." "Do you have any family?" "No." "Friends?" "No." "References?" "No." "So you showed up here with nothing, no connections, no proof of good character, and you expect us to just take your word that you're trustworthy?" Eliza met his gaze and didn't look away. "I expect you to judge me by my actions, not by what I don't have." "Your actions," Mrs. Brennan said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You mean inserting yourself into a vulnerable family and taking advantage of a grieving widower?" "I'm not taking advantage of anyone." "Aren't you? You have a roof over your head, food in your belly, protection. What does Mr. Turner get in return?" "A clean house, cooked meals, someone to look after his boys while he works." "And how long do you plan to stay?" "As long as he'll have me." Mrs. Brennan's smile turned sharp. "How convenient." "That's enough," Cole said, his voice hard. "No, it's not." Mrs. Brennan stood up. "We have a right to know what this woman's intentions are. Is she planning to stay indefinitely? Is she planning to become part of the family? The insinuation was clear, and Eliza felt her face go hot. "That's out of line," Cole said. "Is it?" "Because it seems to me that's exactly what's happening. You've got a strange woman living in your house, sleeping under your roof, and we're all just supposed to pretend that's normal?" "She's not—" "She's what, Cole? Your housekeeper? Your cook? Or something else?" The room erupted. People started shouting, some in agreement, some in protest. Drake banged his gavel, but nobody paid attention. Eliza stood there, frozen, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Then a voice cut through the noise. "Stop it!" Everyone turned. Noah was standing in the middle of the aisle, his hands balled into fists, his face red. Luke was beside him, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Stop saying mean things about her," Noah said, his voice shaking. "She's not bad. She's nice. She makes us breakfast and fixes our clothes, and she doesn't yell at us even when we're stupid. And she's the only person who's been nice to us since Ma died. So stop it." The room went dead silent. Mrs. Brennan opened her mouth, but Noah kept talking. "You don't know her. You don't know anything about her. You just decided she's bad because she's new. But she's not. She's good. And if you make her leave, I'm never going to forgive you. Ever." Luke nodded, wiping his eyes. "Me neither." Eliza felt tears spill down her cheeks, and she didn't bother wiping them away. Drake cleared his throat. "Boys, this isn't—" "Yes, it is." Noah turned to his father. "Pa, tell them. Tell them she's good." Cole looked at his sons, and Eliza saw something shift in his face. Something that had been locked away for a long time finally breaking free. He stood up. "My boys are right," he said quietly. "Mrs. Hart is good. She's hard-working, honest, and kind. She's taken care of my family when nobody else would. She's earned her place on my ranch, and I'm not going to let a bunch of scared, judgmental people take that away from her." "Cole," Mrs. Brennan started. "I'm not done." His voice was like iron. "You want to know what her intentions are? Her intention is to survive, just like the rest of us. You want to know if she's trustworthy? She's more trustworthy than half the people in this room. And you want to know if she's part of my family?" He paused, and his eyes found Eliza's. "Yeah, she is." The room erupted again, but this time Cole didn't wait for it to settle. "So here's how this is going to work. You can vote however you want, but I'm not sending her away. If you want to make an issue of it, you can try. But you're going to have to go through me first." He reached out and took Eliza's hand, and she felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. "Come on," he said. "We're done here." He led her toward the door, the boys following close behind. People stepped aside, some with shock on their faces, others with anger. But nobody tried to stop them. They climbed into the wagon and rode away while the voices inside swelled behind them. Eliza didn't look back. When they got home, Cole helped her down and then stood there in the yard, staring at the ground. "You didn't have to do that," Eliza said quietly. "Yes, I did. They're going to come after you now. Let them." "Cole—" He looked up, and his eyes were blazing. "I meant what I said in there. You're part of this family now, and I don't care what they think about it." Eliza felt something break open in her chest. "Why?" "Because you belong here. Because those boys need you. And because—" He stopped, his jaw working. "Because I need you too." The words hung between them, raw and unguarded. Eliza stepped closer. "I'm not going anywhere." "Good." They stood there in the dark, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Eliza felt like she was standing on solid ground. The boys came running up, and Noah grabbed her hand. "That was scary." "I know. But Pa was amazing." Cole ruffled his hair. "Get inside. It's late." They ran off, and Cole and Eliza followed more slowly. Inside the house felt different, warmer, less like a place she was borrowing, and more like a place she could actually stay. She made tea while Cole got the boys ready for bed, and when he came back out, they sat at the table together in comfortable silence. "What happens now?" Eliza asked. "I don't know. They might try to push harder. They might back off. Either way, we'll deal with it." "Together?" Cole looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "Yeah, together." Eliza nodded and took a sip of tea. The night outside was quiet, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right. The next morning, Eliza woke to the sound of voices outside. She sat up, her heart already racing, and looked out the window. A group of people stood in the yard. Not angry, not threatening, just there. Cole was already outside, his arms crossed, his expression wary. Eliza pulled on her dress and hurried out. Mrs. Calloway was at the front of the group, leaning on a cane. Behind her were a handful of others. Some Eliza recognized from the meeting, others she'd never seen before. "Morning, Turner," Mrs. Calloway said. "Mrs. Calloway." Cole's voice was cautious. "What's this about?" "Came to talk to the girl?" She looked at Eliza. "You got a minute?" Eliza glanced at Cole and he gave a small nod. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Calloway stepped forward, the others staying back. "That was quite a show last night." "I didn't mean for it to be a show." "I know. That's why it mattered." The old woman studied her for a long moment. "You got spine, girl. More than I expected." "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm not here to make you feel good. I'm here to tell you the truth." She leaned on her cane. "This town's going to fight you every step of the way. Some because they're scared, some because they're mean, some because they just don't know any better. But they're going to fight." "I know. Do you? Because fighting back isn't about standing in a room and making speeches. It's about getting up every day and doing the work even when people spit at you. It's about holding your head high when they whisper behind your back. It's about proving them wrong with every breath you take." Eliza met her eyes. "I can do that." "Can you?" "Yes, ma'am, I can." Mrs. Calloway smiled just a little. "Good, because you're going to have to." She turned to the others. "Come on, we've said our piece." The group started to leave, but one woman, a younger woman with a kind face, stepped forward. "Mrs. Hart?" Eliza turned. "Yes?" "I just wanted to say, what you're doing is brave, and I hope you stay." Then she hurried after the others, and Eliza stood there watching them go. Cole came up beside her. "What was that about?" I think it was support." "From Mrs. Calloway?" "From all of them." Cole let out a breath. "Well, I'll be damned." Eliza smiled, and it felt like the first real smile she'd worn in weeks. The days that followed were hard, but different. People still stared. People still whispered. But some of them, a few at first, then more, started nodding when she passed, started saying hello, started treating her like a person instead of a problem. It wasn't much, but it was something, and Eliza held on to it like a lifeline. One afternoon she was in town buying supplies when she ran into Mrs. Finch from the town council. The woman looked uncomfortable, like she wasn't sure whether to speak or keep walking. Finally she stopped. "Mrs. Hart!" "Mrs. Finch, I wanted to apologize for the things I said at the meeting." Eliza blinked. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do. I was wrong. I judged you without knowing you, and that wasn't fair." She took a breath. "My husband reminded me that we were strangers here once, too. And people weren't kind to us either. I should have remembered that." Eliza didn't know what to say. Mrs. Finch gave her a small, awkward smile. "Anyway, I'm sorry. And if you ever need anything, you can ask." She walked away before Eliza could respond. Eliza stood there in the middle of the street holding a bag of flour and felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance. But it was a crack in the wall. And that was enough. That night, after the boys were asleep, Eliza sat on the porch with Cole. The stars were out, bright and sharp against the black sky, and the air was cool. "You did it," Cole said quietly. "Did what?" "Made them see you." Eliza shook her head. "I didn't do it alone." "No, but you started it." He looked at her. "You walked into that meeting and you didn't back down. That mattered." "The boys mattered more." Cole smiled. "Yeah, they did." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of coyotes howling. "Can I ask you something?" Eliza said. "Sure." "When you said I was part of the family, did you mean it?" Cole was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I meant it." "Why?" He looked at her, and his expression was open in a way she'd never seen before. "Because you fit. I don't know how else to explain it. You just fit." Eliza felt tears prick at her eyes, but she didn't look away. I've never fit anywhere before. Well, you do here. She reached out and took his hand, and he squeezed it gently. They sat there together under the stars, and for the first time in her life, Eliza felt like she'd found a place where she could stop running, a place where she could stay, a place that was hers. The change didn't come all at once. It came in small moments, a nod from the shopkeeper when Eliza walked in to buy flour, a woman at the well who didn't turn away when Eliza approached, a man tipping his hat as she passed on the street. Little things, barely noticeable. But after weeks of being invisible, they felt like everything. Cole noticed, too. He didn't say much about it, but Eliza caught him watching her sometimes when she came back from town, like he was checking to make sure she was still in one piece. Nobody spit at you today? He asked one afternoon as she climbed down from the wagon. Not today. Progress, she smiled. I suppose it is. The boys were getting bolder, too. Noah had started talking about her to the other kids at school, and while that had earned him a few bloody noses in the beginning, it seemed like the fights were happening less often now. Luke had made a friend whose mother didn't pull him away when Eliza showed up to collect the boys. It was small, it was slow, but it was something. Still, there were people who refused to bend. Mrs. Brennan crossed the street whenever she saw Eliza coming. Deputy Carson made a point of watching her whenever she was in town, his hand never far from his belt. And Mayor Drake had made it clear at the last council meeting that he considered Cole's defiance a personal insult that wouldn't be forgotten. But they hadn't come back to the ranch. They hadn't tried to force the issue again. And for now, that was enough. One evening, about a month after the town meeting, Cole came in later than usual. Eliza had kept supper warm, and the boys were already in bed. She heard him outside talking to someone in a low voice, and when he finally came in, he looked tired. Everything all right? She asked. He hung his hat on the peg and sat down heavily. Depends on how you look at it. What happened? Ran into Tom Mercer at the feed store. He owns the ranch east of here. Eliza set a plate in front of him. And? He offered me a deal. Said if I agree to let you go, he'll help me with the spring planting. Free labor, extra hands, everything I need to get through the season. Eliza felt her stomach drop. What did you say? Cole looked up at her, and his eyes were hard. I told him to go to hell. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Cole, I'm not interested in deals that involve throwing you out. I thought I made that clear. You did. But if you need help, I'll find it somewhere else. He picked up his fork. Besides, we've managed this long without Mercer's charity. We'll keep managing. Eliza sat down across from him. It's getting harder, though, isn't it? Cole didn't answer right away. He just ate in silence, chewing slowly, his face unreadable. Finally, he set down his fork. Yeah, it's getting harder. Between the ranch work and keeping an eye on the boys and dealing with all the town nonsense, I'm stretched pretty thin. But that's not your problem. It is if I'm the reason it's happening. You're not the reason. They are. He leaned back in his chair, and I'm not going to let them win by making me feel like I made the wrong choice. Because I didn't. Eliza felt her throat tighten. You're a good man, Cole Turner. He snorted. Don't let that get around. I've got a reputation to maintain. She smiled, and they finished supper in comfortable silence. Later that night, after Cole had gone to bed, Eliza sat alone in the kitchen and thought about what he'd said. I'm stretched pretty thin. She'd seen it. The way his shoulders stayed tense even when he was resting. The way he fell asleep at the table some nights before he made it to bed. The way his hands shook just a little when he thought nobody was looking. He was working himself into the ground. And it was because of her. No, not because of her, because of them. The people in town who decided she was a problem and were making Cole pay for refusing to get rid of her. But the result was the same. She needed to do more. Find a way to pull her weight that went beyond cooking and cleaning. She needed to make herself necessary in a way nobody could argue with. The next morning, she got her chance. Cole was out mending fence when one of the horses came up lame. Eliza heard him cursing from inside the house, and when she went out to see what was wrong, she found him standing in the corral with the mare, examining her front leg. What happened? Eliza asked. She stepped wrong. Might be a stone bruise. Might be worse. He straightened up, frustration written all over his face. I can't afford for her to be down. I need her for plowing. Can you call a veterinarian? Cole laughed, but there was no humor in it. With what money? Besides, nearest one is 2 towns over. By the time he got here, it'd be too late. Eliza stepped into the corral. Let me look. Cole frowned. You know horses? I grew up around them. My father kept a stable. He stepped aside and Eliza moved closer to the mare, speaking softly. The horse shifted nervously, but Eliza kept her voice low and steady, running her hand down the animal's neck. Easy, girl. Let me see. She crouched down and lifted the hoof carefully, examining it in the morning light. There was a small stone wedged near the frog, and the area around it was swollen. It's a stone, Eliza said. If we can get it out and keep her off it for a few days, she should be fine. Cole came closer. You sure? No, but it's worth trying. She went to the barn and came back with a hoof pick and some clean cloth. The mare didn't like it, but Eliza worked patiently, talking to her the whole time, and after a few minutes the stone came free. There, Eliza said, setting the hoof down gently. We'll need to keep it clean and wrapped, and she needs rest. Cole stared at her. How'd you know how to do that? I told you. I grew up around horses. You never mentioned that before. Eliza stood up and brushed the dirt off her hands. You never asked. Cole shook his head, something like amazement in his expression. Is there anything you can't do? Plenty, but horses aren't on the list. He looked at the mare, then back at Eliza. You just saved me a week's worth of trouble. Maybe more. Then we're even. We're not even close to even. He reached out and squeezed her shoulder briefly. Thank you. Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest. You're welcome. After that, Cole started asking her opinion on things. Which field to plant first, whether to sell the extra chickens or keep them through winter, how to handle the boys when they got into fights at school. And Eliza answered honestly, not because she thought she knew better, but because he was asking, because he trusted her judgment. It felt good, better than good. It felt like she was building something real, but not everyone was happy about it. 2 weeks later, Eliza was in town picking up supplies when she ran into Mrs. Brennan outside the general store. The woman looked at her like she was something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of her shoe. Mrs. Hart. Mrs. Brennan. I see you're still here. I am. Mrs. Brennan's mouth thinned. You must be very proud of yourself. Eliza set down the bag she was carrying. I'm just trying to live my life, ma'am, same as everyone else. By inserting yourself where you don't belong? I belong exactly where Mr. Turner says I belong. Do you? Mrs. Brennan stepped closer, her voice dropping to something cold and sharp. Because it seems to me you've managed to manipulate a grieving widower into keeping you around. That takes a special kind of person. Eliza felt anger rise in her chest, but she kept her voice level. I haven't manipulated anyone. Haven't you? You show up with nothing. No family, no references, no past anyone can verify. And within weeks you've got a home, a position, and a man defending you like you're something precious. If that's not manipulation, I don't know what is. Maybe it's just called being decent to someone who needed help. Mrs. Brennan laughed, sharp and bitter. Decent? Is that what you call it? Yes. Well, the rest of us call it something else. She picked up her basket. Mark my words, Mrs. Hart, this won't last. Whatever spell you've cast over Cole Turner, it's going to break eventually. And when it does, you'll be right back where you started. Alone, unwanted, and out of options. She walked away before Eliza could respond. Eliza stood there on the street, her hands shaking, and tried to push down the sick feeling in her stomach. She wanted to believe Mrs. Brennan was wrong. Wanted to believe that what she'd built with Cole and the boys was real and solid and couldn't be torn down by gossip and spite. But there was a small, scared part of her that wondered if the woman was right. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay on her bedroll staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, and thought about everything that had happened since she'd arrived. The rejection, the judgment, the slow, painful climb toward something that almost looked like acceptance. And she thought about what would happen if it all fell apart. If Cole decided she was more trouble than she was worth. If the boys got tired of defending her. If the town finally wore them all down until there was nothing left but exhaustion and regret. She'd survived losing everything before. She could survive it again. But the thought of losing this, losing them, felt like something she might not come back from. The next morning, she was up before dawn, and she threw herself into the work with a kind of desperate energy. She scrubbed floors until her knees were raw, hauled water until her shoulders screamed, cooked and cleaned and mended and washed until there was nothing left to do and nowhere left to hide from her own thoughts. Cole found her in the garden that afternoon, pulling weeds that didn't need pulling. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine." "You don't look fine." Eliza sat back on her heels and wiped her forehead. "Just tired." Cole crouched down beside her. "What happened?" "Nothing." "Eliza." She looked at him, and the concern in his eyes made something crack open in her chest. "Mrs. Brennan cornered me in town yesterday, said some things." "What kind of things?" "The usual. That I'm manipulating you, that this won't last, that I'll end up alone again." Cole's expression darkened. "She's wrong." "Is she?" "Yes." He reached out and took her hand, dirt and all. "Listen to me. I don't care what Helen Brennan thinks. I don't care what anyone in that town thinks. You're here because I want you here, because the boys want you here, and that's not going to change." "You can't know that." "Yes, I can, because I'm the one making the decision, not them." He squeezed her hand. "You're not some temporary fix, Eliza. You're part of this family, and I need you to believe that." Eliza felt tears well up, and she didn't try to stop them. "I'm trying." "Then keep trying, because we're not going anywhere. And neither are you." He pulled her to her feet, and for a moment they just stood there in the garden, with the sun beating down and the smell of sage in the air. Then Cole let go of her hand and stepped back. "Come on. Boys will be home soon and they'll want supper." Eliza nodded and followed him back to the house. That evening, after the boys were in bed, Cole came out and sat at the table where Eliza was mending one of Luke's shirts. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." "Why'd you stay?" Eliza looked up. "What do you mean?" "After everything that's happened, the town meeting, the threats, all the grief people have given you, why didn't you just leave?" Eliza set down the shirt and thought about it. "Because I didn't have anywhere else to go." "That's not the only reason." "No, it's not." She met his eyes. "I stayed because for the first time in my life I felt like I mattered, like I was doing something that meant something, and I wasn't ready to give that up." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'm glad you stayed." "So am I." He reached across the table and took her hand, and they sat there together in the lamplight, not saying anything, just being. And for Eliza, that was enough. The weeks that followed were easier. Not perfect, not without tension, but easier. The ranch work settled into a rhythm. Cole handled the heavy labor, and Eliza took care of everything else. The boys thrived under the routine, and even the school teacher stopped sending notes home about Noah getting into fights. In town, people were starting to treat Eliza like a person instead of a problem. Some still crossed the street when they saw her coming, but others nodded. A few even smiled. Mrs. Calloway started stopping by the ranch once a week, bringing preserves and asking Eliza pointed questions about how she was settling in. It was clear the old woman was keeping tabs, but Eliza didn't mind. It felt like having an ally. One afternoon, Mrs. Calloway showed up with a basket of apples and a knowing look. "You've done well for yourself, girl," she said, setting the basket on the porch. "Thank you. Don't thank me. You did the work." She looked around the ranch, taking in the freshly painted fence, the clean yard, the smoke rising from the chimney. "Place looks better than it has in years. Cole's been working hard. So have you." Mrs. Calloway gave her a long look. "You planning to make this permanent?" Eliza blinked. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. Don't play coy with me. I'm too old for games." She leaned on her cane. "That man in there cares about you, and those boys worship you. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Eliza felt her face heat. "I'm just the housekeeper." "Horseshit." "Mrs. Calloway, you think I'm blind? You think I don't see the way he looks at you, or the way you look at him when you think nobody's watching?" She shook her head. "You're family, girl, whether you admit it or not. So the question is, are you going to keep pretending otherwise, or are you going to do something about it?" Eliza didn't know what to say. Mrs. Calloway patted her arm. "Think about it. Life's too short to waste on being careful." Then she climbed back into her wagon and rode off, leaving Eliza standing there with a basket of apples and a head full of thoughts she wasn't ready to examine. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about what Mrs. Calloway had said. Are you going to do something about it? The truth was, she didn't know. She didn't know what Cole wanted. Didn't know if he saw her as anything more than someone who kept his house running and his boys fed. And she was terrified of misreading the situation and ruining everything. But she also couldn't deny that something had shifted between them. The way he touched her hand when he passed her something at the table. The way he lingered in the kitchen after supper, talking about nothing in particular. The way he smiled at her when he thought she wasn't looking. It felt like something. But she didn't know what. A few days later, Cole asked her to ride out with him to check the far pasture. Boys are at school, he said. Thought you might want to get out of the house for a bit. Eliza agreed, and they rode out together under a bright blue sky. The land stretched out around them, brown and gold and endless, and Eliza felt something ease in her chest. Out here, away from the house and the town and all the watching eyes, she could breathe. They rode in silence for a while, and then Cole pulled his horse to a stop near a cluster of trees. This is where I proposed to my wife, he said quietly. Eliza looked at him, surprised. He'd never talked about his wife before. Not really. She loved this spot, Cole continued, said it felt like the edge of the world, like nothing bad could touch you out here. He paused. I haven't been back since she died. Why now? Cole looked at her, and his expression was open in a way she'd never seen. Because I wanted to share it with you. Eliza felt her breath catch. I know this is complicated, Cole said. I know people are watching. I know there are 100 reasons why this doesn't make sense. But I need you to know something. What? You're not just the housekeeper, Eliza. You haven't been for a long time. He swung down from his horse and walked over to her. I don't know what this is. I don't know where it's going. But I know I don't want to lose it. Eliza climbed down and stood in front of him, her heart pounding. I don't want to lose it either. Cole reached out and took her hand. Then let's not. He leaned in, and Eliza closed her eyes, and when his lips touched hers, it felt like coming home. They stood there for a long time, wrapped up in each other, the world falling away. And when they finally pulled apart, Eliza looked up at him and smiled. What do we do now? Cole smiled back. We keep going, same as always, just together. Together, Eliza repeated. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she let herself believe it might actually be true. They didn't tell anyone right away. Not because they were ashamed, but because it felt too new, too fragile to expose to the world just yet. Like something precious that needed time to grow roots before it could withstand the wind. But the boys knew. Children always knew. Eliza saw it in the way Noah watched them at breakfast the next morning, his eyes flicking between her and his father with something that looked like cautious hope. Saw it in the way Luke smiled when Cole's hand lingered on Eliza's shoulder as he passed behind her chair. Are you and Pa together now? Luke asked that afternoon while Eliza was helping him with his schoolwork. Eliza looked up from the slate where she'd been writing out arithmetic problems. What makes you ask that? He's different. Happier. Luke tilted his head. And you smile more. Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest. Would that be all right? If we were together? Luke didn't even hesitate. Yeah, I think Ma would have liked you. The words hit Eliza like a punch, and she had to blink back tears. Thank you, Luke. That means more than you know. Noah was harder to read. He didn't say anything about the change between her and Cole, but Eliza caught him watching sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Not angry, not upset, just thinking. It wasn't until a week later that he finally spoke up. They were in the barn, and Eliza was helping him muck out the stalls. Noah worked in silence for a long time, then stopped and leaned on his shovel. If you and Pa get married, does that mean you're staying forever? Eliza paused, her hands tightening on the rake. Nobody said anything about marriage, Noah. But if you did, would you stay? She looked at him, and she saw the fear underneath the question. The fear of losing someone else. The fear of getting attached to something that might disappear. Yes, she said quietly. If that happened, I would stay. Forever. Noah nodded slowly, like he was testing the weight of her words. Good, because I don't want you to leave. I know. I mean it. Not ever. Eliza set down the rake and walked over to him. Noah, I'm not going anywhere. Whether your father and I get married or not, I'm here. You're stuck with me. He looked up at her, and his eyes were bright. Promise? I promise. He nodded again, then went back to work. But Eliza saw the tension leave his shoulders, and she knew something had shifted. The town noticed before anyone said a word. Maybe it was the way Cole stood a little closer to Eliza when they were in public. Maybe it was the way she laughed at something he said while they were loading supplies into the wagon. Maybe it was just the fact that they looked happy, and happiness was hard to hide. Whatever it was, people saw it, and they talked. Some of the talk was kind. Mrs. Calloway made a point of telling anyone who'd listen that it was about damn time Cole found someone. A few of the women who'd started warming up to Eliza offered quiet congratulations, like they'd been waiting for this all along. But others weren't so generous. Mrs. Brennan's disapproval turned sharper, more pointed. She made comments in the general store about women who used grief to manipulate their way into a man's life. Deputy Carson started watching Cole with the same suspicion he'd reserved for Eliza. And Mayor Drake called another town meeting. This time, the letter wasn't nailed to the barn. It was delivered by a boy on horseback, handed directly to Cole while he was working in the field. Cole read it, his face hardening with each word, then crumpled it in his fist. "What is it?" Eliza asked when he came inside. "Drake wants to discuss the moral character of the Turner household." He threw the paper onto the table. "Says there have been concerns raised about improper conduct." Eliza felt her stomach drop. "What kind of concerns?" "The kind that come from people who've got nothing better to do than stick their noses where they don't belong." He paced across the kitchen, his hands clenched. "They can't stand that we're happy, can't stand that we're building something good here, so they're trying to tear it down." "What do we do?" Cole stopped pacing and looked at her. "We go. We face them. And we tell them the truth. Which is that what happens in this house is none of their damn business." The meeting was set for the following Saturday. This time, when they walked into the building, Eliza wasn't afraid. She was angry. Angry at the hypocrisy. Angry at the judgment. Angry at people who claimed to care about morality while tearing apart anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable. The room was packed again, but the energy felt different. Less hostile. More uncertain. Like people weren't sure what they were supposed to think anymore. Drake sat at the front with his usual entourage, but even he looked less confident than before. Cole didn't wait for Drake to start. He stood up as soon as they walked in, his voice carrying across the room. "Let's get one thing straight," he said. "I'm here because I was told I had to be. But I'm not here to justify my life to any of you. What happens on my ranch, in my home, with my family, that's my business, not yours." "Mr. Turner," Drake started, but Cole kept talking. "You've been trying to run Eliza out of town since the day she arrived. You've questioned her character, her intentions, her right to exist in this community. And you've done it all while pretending you're concerned about my boys, but you're not concerned about them. You're concerned about control." "That's not true," Mrs. Brennan said sharply. "We're concerned about what kind of example you're setting." "What kind of example?" Cole's voice was hard. "The example of treating people with decency? The example of giving someone a chance when no one else would? The example of not judging people based on gossip and fear? The example," Mrs. Brennan shot back, "of living in sin." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Eliza felt her face burn, but before she could respond, Cole laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. "Living in sin," he repeated. "That's rich coming from you, Helen. You want to talk about sin? Let's talk about the sin of cruelty. The sin of turning away someone in need. The sin of deciding you're better than everyone else because you've got a fancy house and a husband who made money off other people's labor." Mrs. Brennan's face went white. "Cole," Drake said, his voice carrying a warning. "No." Cole turned to face him. "You called this meeting. You wanted to air grievances. So let's air them. You want to know what's happening in my house? I'll tell you. Eliza Hart is the best thing that's happened to me and my boys since my wife died. She's hardworking, honest, and kind. She's earned her place in our lives, and I'll be damned if I let you or anyone else take that away." "And what exactly is her place?" Drake asked. Cole didn't hesitate. "She's my partner, my equal, and if I have my way, she'll be my wife." The room erupted. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She stared at Cole, her heart pounding, and he turned to look at her. I know this isn't how I planned to ask, he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear over the noise. But I mean it. Will you marry me, Eliza? She felt tears spill down her cheeks. Yes. The word came out barely a whisper, but Cole heard it. He crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms, and the room went silent. Mrs. Calloway stood up, leaning on her cane, and started clapping. It was slow at first, just her weathered hands coming together in steady rhythm. Then someone else joined, then another, then another. Not everyone. Mrs. Brennan sat with her arms crossed, her face like stone. Deputy Carson looked disgusted. Mayor Drake just stared, his expression unreadable. But enough people clapped that it didn't matter. Cole pulled back and looked down at Eliza. Let's get out of here. They walked out together, the boys following close behind, and the applause followed them into the night. Outside under the stars, Cole stopped and turned to face her. I meant what I said in there. I know. I want to marry you. Build a life with you. Make this real. Eliza reached up and touched his face. It already is real. He kissed her, and the boys made exaggerated gagging noises. And for the first time in months, Eliza laughed until her sides hurt. They were married 3 weeks later. It wasn't a big ceremony, just Mrs. Calloway, a few neighbors who'd become friends, and the boys standing up front in their good shirts with dirt still under their fingernails. The man who performed the ceremony was a traveling minister who asked no questions and offered no judgment. He read the words, Cole and Eliza exchanged simple rings made from bent wire, and it was done. Eliza became Eliza Turner. The town's reaction was mixed. Some people congratulated them, others pretended it hadn't happened. A few made it clear they thought it was scandalous and shameful and wrong. But none of that mattered anymore, because Eliza had what she'd been searching for since the day her husband died. A home, a family, a place where she belonged. The work didn't get easier. If anything, it got harder. The ranch demanded constant attention, and there was always something that needed fixing or planting or harvesting. Money was tight. The town's judgment didn't disappear overnight. And there were days when Eliza wondered if they'd made a mistake, if they'd moved too fast, if the weight of everything they were carrying would eventually crush them. But then she'd look at Cole working in the field, or hear the boys laughing in the yard, or sit down to supper with her family around the table, and she'd remember why it was worth it. One evening, about 6 months after the wedding, Eliza was sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Cole came and sat beside her. You ever regret it? He asked. Regret what? All of this. Marrying me. Taking on this life. Eliza looked at him. Do you? Never. Then there's your answer. He took her hand and they sat in comfortable silence. You know what I think about sometimes, Eliza said after a while. What? That first day, when you offered me a week of work. If you'd said no, if you'd turned me away like everyone else, you would have survived, Cole said. You're too stubborn not to. Maybe, but I wouldn't have this. She squeezed his hand. I wouldn't have had the chance to build something that mattered. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You know what I learned from all this? What? That people are scared of anything that challenges what they think they know. They see someone like you, someone who doesn't fit their idea of how things should be, and it terrifies them. Because if you can build a life outside their rules, what does that say about their rules? Eliza nodded slowly. And what do we do about that? We keep living, keep proving them wrong, not because we need their approval, but because we deserve to exist on our own terms. She leaned her head on his shoulder. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of letting other people dictate my life. They sat there until the stars came out, and Eliza felt something settle in her chest. Not contentment exactly, not peace, but something close to it, acceptance maybe, of the life they'd chosen, of the struggles that came with it, of the fact that it would never be easy, but it would always be theirs. The boys grew. Noah stopped getting into fights at school, or at least stopped getting caught. Luke made more friends, and his teacher said he was doing well with his reading. They still had bad days, days when they missed their mother, or pushed back against Eliza's authority, or reminded her that she wasn't their real family. But those days got fewer and further between. One afternoon, almost a year after Eliza had arrived, Noah came home with a drawing he'd done in school. It was a picture of the ranch, done in charcoal, with 4 figures standing in front of the house. "That's us," he said, pointing. "Pa, you, me, and Luke." Eliza looked at the drawing, her throat tight. "It's beautiful, Noah. You can keep it if you want. I'd like that very much." He shrugged like it didn't matter, but she saw the pleased look on his face as he walked away. She hung the drawing on the wall above the fireplace, and every time she looked at it, she remembered what she'd fought for. What they'd all fought for. The town changed too, slowly, grudgingly. But it changed. Mrs. Brennan never warmed up to Eliza, but she stopped openly criticizing her. Deputy Carson moved on to bothering someone else. And Mayor Drake eventually resigned after a scandal involving misappropriated funds, which Mrs. Calloway said was long overdue. New families moved in, people who didn't know the history, who didn't care about the gossip, who just saw Eliza as Cole's wife and the boy's mother. And the old families, the ones who remembered, started to forget why they'd been so upset in the first place. Eliza became part of the fabric of the town, not invisible, but not remarkable either. Just there. A woman who ran her household, raised her boys, and minded her own business. It was the most ordinary thing in the world, and it was everything she'd ever wanted. 2 years after they married, Eliza found out she was pregnant. She told Cole one evening after the boys had gone to bed, and he stared at her like she'd just told him the sky was falling. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He sat down heavily. "A baby." "Yes." "Our baby." "Yes." He looked up at her, and his eyes were wet. "I don't know if I can do this again. After what happened with Sarah." Eliza knelt in front of him and took his hands. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But we're going to do this together, and whatever happens, we'll face it." Cole pulled her close, and they stayed like that for a long time. The pregnancy was hard. Eliza was sick for months, and there were days when she could barely get out of bed. Cole took on more of the housework, and the boys helped where they could, and somehow they all made it through. When the baby finally came, it was a girl. They named her Sarah, after Cole's first wife. The boys were obsessed with her from the moment they saw her. Noah held her with exaggerated care, like she might break, and Luke insisted on sitting next to her cradle every night to make sure she was breathing. And Cole looked at Eliza holding their daughter with an expression that made her chest ache. "We did it," he said quietly. "We did. You gave me my life back." Eliza shook her head. "We gave each other our lives back." He kissed her forehead, and she closed her eyes and let herself feel it. The weight of everything they'd built. The struggle and the pain and the joy of it all. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect, but it was theirs. Years passed. The ranch prospered. The boys grew into young men who worked the land beside their father and looked after their little sister with fierce protectiveness. Sarah grew strong and stubborn, with Eliza's determination and Cole's quiet strength. The town moved on. New scandals replaced old ones. New families brought new stories. And eventually, nobody remembered or cared about the widow who'd arrived with nothing and built a life anyway. Except Eliza. She remembered every moment, every rejection, every small victory, every person who'd helped, and every person who'd tried to break her. She remembered because it mattered, because it had shaped who she was, because forgetting would be like pretending it had been easy, and it hadn't been easy. It had been the hardest thing she'd ever done, but it had also been worth it. One evening, when Sarah was 5 and the boys were nearly grown, Eliza stood on the porch and looked out at the land. Cole came up beside her. "What are you thinking about?" "That first day, when you offered me a week. Best decision I ever made." Eliza smiled. "You didn't think so at the time." "No, I thought I was crazy." He put his arm around her. "Turns out I was right, but crazy worked out." She leaned into him. "You know what I think people get wrong?" "What?" "They think belonging is something you're given, like it's a gift someone hands you, and all you have to do is accept it." She paused. "But it's not. Belonging is something you build, brick by brick, day by day. And sometimes you have to fight for every single inch of ground." Cole nodded. "And sometimes the people around you fight just as hard to keep you out." "Yeah, but if you're stubborn enough, if you refuse to disappear, if you keep showing up even when they tell you not to..." She trailed off. "You win," Cole finished. "No, you don't win. You just survive. And then one day you wake up and realize you're not just surviving anymore, you're living. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm glad you're stubborn." Eliza laughed. "Me too." They stood there together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Eliza thought about all the women who'd come before her, all the women who'd been told they didn't belong, who'd been turned away and judged and cast out. Some of them had survived, some hadn't, but all of them had tried. And that was what mattered. Not the winning or losing, not the acceptance or rejection, but the trying, the refusing to disappear, the insistence on existing even when the world said you had no right to. That was the lesson. That was what she'd pass on to her daughter and her sons, and anyone else who needed to hear it. You don't need permission to exist. You don't need approval to build a life. You just need the courage to keep going when everything tells you to quit. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you find people who'll stand beside you and fight with you and remind you why you started in the first place. Eliza had found those people. She'd found her family. And she'd found her home. Not because it had been given to her, but because she'd built it with her own 2 hands. Inside, she heard Sarah calling for her, and Noah and Luke arguing about something, and Cole chuckled. "Sounds like they need you." "They always need me," Eliza said, but she was smiling. She turned and walked back into the house, into the noise and the chaos, and the beautiful, messy reality of the life she'd fought for. And she didn't look back, because there was nothing behind her worth looking at. Everything that mattered was right here,